Syncline Winery is located in the very diverse Columbia Gorge AVA. This AVA straddles the Columbia Gorge and is shared with Oregon. Syncline sits on the Washington side of the gorge near Lyle. The name Syncline comes from the Coyote Wall Syncline that sits west of the vineyard. It is a series of 300-foot cliffs that rise straight up from the Columbia River. In this tortured landscape with a variety of soils, climates, and topography, James and Poppy Mantone built their winery and established their estate vineyard. Over the centuries, the landscape here has changed in dramatic ways, and so has the soil. The Missoula floods bring in rocks and soils from far away, ash and lava from volcanic eruptions, making layers of varied soils deposited and swept away again.
So the soils here were all flood deposited soils from the Missoula floods, but we have not just Missoula flood soils that go on. So we've got the Blow Lake series down low, which is this cobbly, sandy soil on top of gravel. And we're talking pure gravel, some of it with like practically zero organic matter.
Wow.
And that's what's down here, and that's where there's about 3 to 6 feet of sandy cobble and then about 90 feet of pure gravel with no organic matter. Then you get up a little bit higher and you get into what were scablands and then wind-blown soils, and we have Mount Mazama ash deposits in spots,
Okay.
Pure volcanic ash, and then wind-blown soil, which is clay-like loamy soil. And then we also get outwash soils from flood events that brought soil down from up above that deposited, and that's actually deposited over the alluvial soils here.
In addition to a variety of soils, this landscape is rugged. James speaks of it as tortured topography. This causes dramatic differences in climate from areas just 15 minutes apart.
The gorge is a crazy place for the weather, because it's not just how far east-west you are, because rainfall patterns change. I mean, we're still sitting here, we're at 350 feet, but we're still in the Cascade Mountains. So you not only have the marine influence blowing in from the west side and the heat of the desert coming together, and that's what fuels our winds all summer, but you also get this kind of subalpine effect. So down every one of these canyons, morning and evening come a blast of cold air. So it's not uncommon for us in July and August to be 95, 100 degrees, but still drop down to 48, 58, or 52 degrees at night. It's pretty rare that we don't sleep with a comforter on around here. So the diurnal exchange is extreme. We've seen days where we've gone from 35 to 95 in a single day. But also being farther west, and the river itself kind of protects us from winter kill. We don't see the cold winter temperatures that you do even just 8 miles east of here. This is what makes the gorge so interesting from a farming and wine drinking standpoint, is that this is probably one of the most tortured and broken up AVAs out there, in that the weather patterns shift quite a bit from east to west, where we're farming on the west side up, we get 56 inches of precipitation. It's not uncommon to have the fruiting wire buried under snow all winter. Here we get about 14 inches of precipitation. That's a 15-minute drive. But what unifies it all are these cold nights and the wind. So the wind, even though we're warmer on this end of the gorge, the wind really suppresses ripening and maintains high levels of acidity, really low pHs. So it's all over the place. There is no simple way to define the gorge and the climate here.
I have long been fascinated with biodynamics. Part ancient common sense science, part reverence for the earth, I always find myself drawn to the people who choose to practice this method of growing. James came from a background in microbiology, and I was anxious to hear his thoughts on biodynamics.
My wife and I have been involved in biodynamics for 23 years, 22 years, somewhere along there. And it's something that we've gotten into for ourselves, for our work environment. The one thing that wine is a really mysterious beverage. And one of the things that I pursue in wine is I want wine to have energy and vitality. And that is more than just intensity or concentration, but I want wine to be just vibrant and electric. And for me, living soils, healthy vines are the best way to do that. People always like to say, well, it's trying to express terroir. It's like, we're trying to find out if we have terroir. That's really it. I mean, there's a lot of site variation in the Northwest, but there's very, very little terroir. And terroir and site variations are not the same thing. They're radically different, in my opinion. So it's a way of trying to bring that back. I mean, if you look at it, it's only been in the last few hundred years that we've detached spirituality from farming. And food and beverage should do more than just provide fats, carbs, and protein. And so that's what the other side of why we pursue biodynamics.
In the winery, one of the major decisions is how to age your wines. Oak barrels, depending on their size and age, can impart their own flavors into the wine. James tells us why he leans towards large format vessels for aging his wines.
So more and more, we like large format in general.
I noticed your wood fermenters too.
Yeah, so we're going to have 6 large wood fermenters that we're also going to age wines in.
Great.
And concrete, we've got 4 concrete tanks. And I think that the least important thing that wood does is flavor. And for me, that's purchased flavors. And anybody can buy them and add them. So that's not all that interesting from a farming standpoint. But there's some things that wood does with oxygen exchange and settling and stabilizing wine that's amazing. And you get some of those same effects with concrete. And that's what initially drew us to concrete. You get large thermal mass, so you don't get huge temperature changes. And with wood, even older wood, you get rounding out. You don't get quite the rounding out in concrete. The wines are maybe a little bit more lean, but you walk this line of 2 things that shouldn't exist at the same time. And that's a little bit of reduction, so some savory, kind of earthy flavors, and also really bright red, bright fruit. So 2 things that usually contradict each other and you never see together, but in concrete we see it. So we like that. We get better mouthfeel, gain texture, kind of lose a little aromatics that you get out of stainless, but the wines are broader. And for our case too, a lot of wine in Washington, intensity is not our problem. And they allow us to kind of craft a little bit more elegance and lightness into some of these bigger wines.
We continued speaking as we headed into the vineyard, discussing the old oaks on the property, the xeriscape gardens, and the use of beetle kill wood and salvaged juniper post in the making of the winery. In the vineyard, we see the baby ferment and the mongoose, both first plantings of these varieties in the state of Washington. We continue to climb toward the Syrah at the top of the vineyard and turn to take in the view and listen to the hawks soaring above.
Looks like happy hawks over there too. Wow.
Yeah. You know, and that's one of the things that's really cool about this area is that you don't have contiguous vineyards. And so you have vineyards tucked into these wild areas.
Yeah.
And so the wine should reflect this little bit of wildness, and it's a landscape of abrupt edges and wind, and so the wine should be a little uncomfortable, a little energetic.
We return to the winery and taste through some of his wines. The Grüne Veltliner from Bloxam Vineyard, east of the city of Yakima, that ages, as is traditional, in acacia wood. The Picpoul from Boucher Vineyard in the central Yakima Valley that is bright and sharp and made in stainless steel. The first vintage of their estate Gamay, a tiny harvest of third-leaf fruit that was made in a neutral style while they explored what this grape might be like here. We taste his Syrah from Boucher Vineyard, blue fruit from one little hillside, the original planting at that vineyard. Finally, we end our tasting with some preview bubbles. A 2017 sparkling Grüne Veltliner from Underwood Vineyard that is still in the riddling racks. It is sharp and fragrant, energetic and joyful, and a perfect way to round out our visit to this stunning place.